Alright, I got the bike on the ground now. If you haven't used the bike in a long time, it's always a really good idea to just triple check the two-stroke oil level. That's going to be the biggest thing, the most critical thing with this bike, because it uses its lubrication. It can, it goes down slowly. It's a large enough reservoir, but it just can't hurt to check. So the seat is pretty easy to, it's easy to access this tank. I put the upholstery pad, which has an aluminum structure to it, is velcroed to the pan. This is where I keep my registration. But under the registration is the two-stroke oil level. The dipstick doesn't go down to the bottom of the oil can, so if you see that there's oil on the dipstick, you know that you have plenty. I do like to keep it well seen on the dipstick, but if there's any at all, then you're safe to at least get home. Just for a rule of thumb, though, I like to keep it, a little bit up on that stick. Also, I can take this. Well, I'll do a starting procedure. So the first thing that you've done is you check your oil. There's plenty of oil. Again, like I said, if you haven't ridden the bike in a long time, then there's another procedure to starting it. This petcock is a factory Suzuki petcock. It runs off a vacuum line here. So with the engine running, it creates vacuum through this line, and that's what ultimately opens and closes this petcock. What'll happen is if you don't use the bike for a long time, fuel will evaporate out of the carburetor bowls, and so it won't fire up without the right amount of fuel in the bowls. So what you do is, if you look through the window of this petcock, you can see the function, and it's hard to see in the video, but right now it's in the on position. So this is where you'll be in normal riding conditions. If you run out of fuel, you can bring it over this way to reserve. But again, both these functions work off a vacuum. On this side we have prime, and if you put it to prime, this will be on all the time, and you can actually watch the fuel run down the line into the fuel filter. And if you haven't ridden the bike in a long time, let that fuel run until it stops completely. You'll see a bubble come up, and there'll be no more flow. When there's no more flow, you can start it in that position, or you can bring it, you have a full carburetor, you can bring it down to the run position. And the one thing that's nice about this style is when you turn the bike off, or you're done with it for the day, you don't need to remember to turn the fuel off, because it's off as soon as the engine's off, just as long as you don't leave it in the prime position. So this is only, the prime position is only for when you haven't ridden it a long time. Let it sit, let it run, fill up the carburetors, then put it to on, and you're good to go. There's a choke lever here, so if it's a 90-degree hot summer day and you've already been riding the bike and or etc., you won't need to use this. But if you haven't run it at all in a little while, you'll push this up. That chokes all three carburetors, and start it. You can let it run for just a few seconds, to maybe 15 seconds on the choke, and then as long as it stays running well with the choke off, you're pretty good to go. Kind of skipped a step. Well, the first thing to do would be to let the fuel fill up. This is your ignition switch, your main ignition switch, and so one click is run. You can see the headlight comes on. This is your ignition, all your lighting, that's fully on. If you turn it, continue one more click, the ignition will turn off, so the bike will turn off, but the tail light will stay on. You can see that's still lit up. So that's like a parking position, and a lot of people ruin their battery because they turn it, the bike turns off, leaves the tail light on, they walk away, and it stays on until the next time they ride, and they have a dead battery. So make sure it's just like a car. You put it in, turn it to the right to go, turn it all the way to the left, and it's off. You also have a kill switch here, so when you turn the key on, light comes on. Make sure when this is in the run position. This is kind of an emergency stop switch, so if you run into an issue, God forbid something happens, the throttle sticks or anything of that, that's like your go-to, turn the bike off. But I try to stay out of the habit of using that, because if you use that, the bike goes off. Sometimes you can be walk away from it at that point and leave your ignition on, and that can cause other issues, burning out coils or killing the battery, etc. So basically it's pretty simple, straightforward. Turn the fuel on, ignition on, choke on, and when you're starting it, you'll learn the characteristic of the bike, but I found, at least every time I've tried to start it, that no throttle. Just leave it in the idle position, kick it gently 2 to 3 times. It starts on the second kick sometimes. Occasionally it takes 3, but if it doesn't kick on the third, maybe try a little bit of throttle. If it doesn't kick on after that one, then you might be overlooking something. It shouldn't be the type of bike that you have to sit there and kick all the time. You might have the kill switch on, or you might have the ignition switch off, right, etc. So that's the starting procedure. We can move on to see, what else do you need to know? The suspension is it is adjustable. It's got an oil dampening system here. That's not something that you'd really adjust. That's just if you noticed that there were leaks, you'd rebuild it and make sure it was up to level. But that should pretty much remain where it is. You can stiffen and loosen the shocks with these two adjuster nuts. It's a jam nut system, so you loosen the top one and then the bottom one. If you tighten it down, you're going to be stiffer. If you loosen it up, it's going to be less stiff. Let's see. The exhaust system is rubber mounted. The engine itself is on a rubber mounting system. So as you're driving or sitting there, the motor is isolated from the frame. So for that matter, the exhaust, which is hard mounted to the motor, needs to be able to move, vibrate with the engine vibrations. So in the back, I created this mounting system which has a bracket, so I can get in there, off the back side of the rear set mounts, and that is isolated with rubber mounts, and there's a little fiber washer in there. And then in addition, these tabs here are slightly rubber mounted, and so it all is designed to keep the vibrations of the exhaust down and let it move with the motor. One thing that I could possibly see in the future as being a concern would be with the amount of vibrations that go on with this exhaust system. Just keep an eye on making sure that all this hardware stays tight. If you ride this bike for the next 3 years and you've never loosened a nut, then you're probably good to go. But the bike doesn't have a ton of miles on it. I've probably ridden about 300 miles on the bike. I haven't had any issues there with that, but it's something to keep an eye on as a potential concern. Again, I stress the importance of making sure the engine sees its two-stroke lubrication. This is a really good quality rubber line. It's on there. You couldn't even get this off by hand. You'd have to cut it off. But being exposed the way it is, just make sure that there's really no leaks coming from there, and make sure that rubber hose stays in good condition. A few years down the line, or even once a year, it might be a good idea to remove the filters, remove the housing to the oil injection pump, and replace that line. One thing that is, because I have concerns, not that I have concerns, but it's always a concern of mine to make sure that there's no issues with the lubrication system. There's a way to synchronize the injection pump to the carburetors, and you can read about that in your manual, but essentially there's a screw here on the side of the carburetor. If you remove this and you lift the throttle a little, you can see a little dot come up into that window. You can see the throttle slide with a little mark. So you center the mark in that window, and then with this cover off here, these two screws, you can see the pump, and there'll be a line on the butterfly of the pump, and that will align with a mark on the side. So you bring the throttle up until you see the dot, and you look over here and you see that the lines are aligned. Just make sure that, that's something to check every now and again. If this cable, which controls the pump, it's spliced off the throttle, if this becomes stretched, or if vibrations somehow move this adjustment, then that's something that you want to keep an eye on. Just make sure that the pump is always activated in the right position for the carburetor. And like I say, with these old machines, it can't hurt to, if you're ever wondered if you're on the level or a little below the level, it's always better to add more oil than not. You know, you will foul a plug slightly quicker, but I'd rather do that than rebuild the engine. So, you know, you'd get a little bit slightly less performance, but you know, it's you're not racing the next guy who has the same bike. So, other than that, if you have any questions, I could try to answer them for you. And I really hope you enjoy your bike. You've definitely got something that is incredibly unique. And any show you go to, you're going to be the only guy with the bike. And no one has anything like this. So I hope you enjoy it and have a lot of fun and be safe. Talk to you soon.